That was a very impressive display from Sean Brady. It answered a lot of his critics' questions. At the same time, it left a lot of questions left unanswered about Gilbert Burns, how much he has left in the tank. We saw some moments from him, but we're going to get into all of that. This is a new feature I'm running called 5 Things We Learned. It's inspired by my good friend, a guy called Henry, and his boxing channel. We're going to have these 5 boxes. As we go through the video, we're going to reveal one at a time things that we've learnt from recent fights. So without messing around, let's get straight into it. The first thing we learned about Sean Brady is that he is a true contender. We've seen losses derail undefeated fighters so many times before. I know that Darren Till's the classic example against Tyron Woodley that everyone likes to go back to. But Sean Brady did what I absolutely love. He worked on his weaknesses after the loss to Belal Muhammad. He's come back looking like a much improved fighter. Let's start with his striking, it's where we need to start. His striking looked quick, crisp. It wasn't the typical wrestler turned striker. He was getting off combinations, then angling out, avoiding the counters that occasionally came his way. The leg kicks are definitely something I want to talk about, particularly in the 5th round. That inside low kick was really causing Gilbert Burns problems. So he showed himself to have gone away, taken some time out, worked on his deficiencies that he did have, and he's come back looking a much improved fighter. He's a real contender in this welterweight division. He was using his boxing to set up other things, and whilst he didn't hurt Gilbert Burns at any time really, he was putting the pressure on, striking was really nice, and he's proved himself to be a real contender in this division. Next we have to look at the opponent, Gilbert Burns. One thing we learnt about him in this fight is that he is old, he has aged. He isn't the fighter that he was 2 years ago in that war with Khamzat Chimaev. Yeah, he looked quite tentative, throwing things back. I'm not sure how much faith he has in his chin now. He was moving back, covering up a lot of the time, and the volume just wasn't there. Dominic Cruz pointed out in the broadcast, he was constantly looking for that one punch. He was loading up on the strikes, and he really complemented Sean Brady's improved striking. He was loading up on a big right hand, which allowed Sean Brady to get his offense off, back up out the way, avoid a counter strike and then come back in and unload again. That was generally the theme and the tone and the pattern of the fight that we saw last night. I love Gilbert Burns. He's like that uncle that you love, you know, he's got a really nice demeanour about him. You can tell that he's like a fighter's favourite fighter as well. No one seems to have bad words to say about Gilbert Burns, but it's the age-old story. Father Time waits for no one, and Gilbert Burns does look like an older fighter. I do think there are still good fights for him left to have. You know, he still does have the power. Some of the scrambles that he showed were really impressive, but he's 38 in a division where the up-and-comers are all in their late 20s or like Sean Brady, early 30s. MMA is a young man's game, and unfortunately Gilbert Burns is just the other side of the hill. Again, I want to say, I think there will be, he does have name value, so I think there'll be some big main events, more money fights between him and other veterans, rather than fighting these young, hungry contenders. Like I said, not necessarily trusting your chin is just not a good place to be when you're facing these contenders. So we learned in this fight that Gilbert Burns, at 38, he's definitely on the decline. As much as it hurts me to say that, he's on the decline, and I think any ambitions of UFC gold are now out the window. He needs to focus on, 1, doing what he does best, working on the scrambles and the power shots, and looking at getting those preferable matchups against other veterans in the division. In fact, I'd like to see him even against someone like Michael Venom Page. Exciting striking, you know, MVP's, he's new to the UFC, but he's 35, 36. So fights like that would be really interesting. Moving on, another thing that we learned about Sean Brady. A lot of the criticism that had come Sean Brady's way was his lack of power, pillow hands accusations, and you know what? I don't think that's actually really an issue in this fight. He showed in this fight that he mixed up the striking and the wrestling to a really, really elite level. This is mixed martial arts, it's not kickboxing. You should be able to combine the two, have a nice mix of working strikes into grappling, and when grappling doesn't work, being able to break off with strikes. And Sean Brady was doing that all night. We've seen a lot of fighters striking at 60, 70%. I'm thinking Nate Diaz, Colby Covington, and they've always had the accusations of pillow hands, it's only going to take them so far. Now maybe these aren't the best examples to use because they never got UFC gold, but I think Sean Brady does it to another level. He's so strong, he's clearly so strong. When he gets hold of the fighters, you can see they struggle to get him off. Gilbert Burns, don't get me wrong, is elite at grappling, a former jiu-jitsu world champion, and he can wrestle, which isn't so common with elite jiu-jitsu guys, but he can do it all. So for Sean Brady to dominate the fight in the way that he did, I know that he got taken down occasionally, but over 25 minutes, that's to be expected. I just think we have to acknowledge that rather than saying Sean Brady doesn't have knockout power, he just uses his power in a correct way. He dials back slightly, doesn't wind up on the shots like we saw Gilbert Burns do, and this allows him to make smarter entries with the wrestling, get takedowns, not leave himself open if he is to miss on strikes. And I think it's quite smart of him to do this. If he was just a banger, a kickboxer, and he didn't have the power, it would be another story. But the fact that he's such an elite wrestler means that it makes sense for him not to load up on shots, to be smart with his striking. Don't get me wrong, I'd like to see him unload a bit more. I'd have liked to see him hurt Gilbert Burns really from this standpoint, to really push himself into the top title contender conversation, because he's still not quite there, but it was a really impressive display of mixed martial arts. In rounds 3 and 5 in particular, Sean Brady was ragdolling Gilbert Burns with the wrestling. He took him down, he threw him around a couple of times. In the 5th round, he was flexing a bit, wasn't he? He picked him up, dropped him down, threw him about a bit, and that's what we need to see. The fact that he didn't hurt Gilbert Burns on the feet will definitely be something that some critics take away and say that maybe he could have done better. But if we look at his performance as a whole, it was completely dominant. So looking back on the 3 things we've learnt so far, yes, Sean Brady is definitely a contender. Losing to Belal Muhammad, the current UFC champion, hasn't really harmed him. That loss has aged really well. He's gone away, worked on his striking, and he looks like a much better fighter for it. It's a rare instance of when taking a loss is actually good for your career in the long run. Secondly, Gilbert did look old. That's one thing that we can't deny. It's as much as it breaks your heart to see it, Gilbert Burns isn't the fighter that he was a couple of years ago. And thirdly, Sean Brady's lack of power, or lack of perceived power, is really made up for the fact that he can combine his striking and his wrestling to an elite level. That's going to serve him really well in title contender fights and eventually title fights should he get there. Before we get on to number 4, I'm going to ask you to subscribe to the channel. You can see that I've been doing a lot of interviews with MMA fighters, Thai boxers, MMA breakdowns and things like that. I'm really passionate about the sport. I'd appreciate any support you can give me. Like this video and subscribe. Moving on to the 4th thing that we learnt in this fight. And really this is more of a strategic, tactical thing. But the worst thing you can do against a pressure fighter like Sean Brady is back up and not angle off. You can see that Gilbert Burns, it might be to do with age, I'm not too sure. I'd need to look back at other fights to see if this is a habit of his. But when Sean Brady was moving forward, unloading those 4-5 punch combinations, Gilbert Burns was just backing up against the fence, which is exactly where a pressure wrestler like Sean Brady wants you to be. This played into Sean Brady's game plan, and it allowed him really to flex his muscles, show off that he can strike, he's accurate with his punches, and that he can press you against the sides and get the takedown. The reason why I'm mentioning this backing up in straight lines is because it really ties in with the call out we saw from Sean Brady at the end of the fight. He called out Ian Mercado Gary, or Ian Magado Cherry, I think he called him at the end of the fight, said that they both have the same manager, so this fight should be easy to make. But Ian Gary isn't the type of fighter who's going to just move back in straight lines. He's going to angle off. It's going to be a very different fight to this one. And you know what? It could actually be a potential banana skin for Sean Brady on his rise to the top. Realistically, if these two fight, it would be a number 1 contender fight. But Sean Brady can't expect that he can do the same game plan that he did against Gilbert Burns. Ian McGarry's too clever for that. His movement's too slick. He'll get out of the way and make you pay from angles with crisp counters. We've seen him use good right hands, good left hands when he's been getting out of the way from blitzes and attackers moving forward. So whilst in this fight we did learn, or you did relearn the fact that moving back in straight lines is just a disaster against most fighters, but particularly against pressure fighters. But in this case, if he is going to fight Ian Gary next, there needs to be a different game plan. He needs to expect drop-offs with the shoulder, angles out. He can't just march them forward into the fence. Finally, the 5th thing we learned from Sean Brady against Gilbert Burns. The big question, or one of the big questions for Sean Brady after the Belal Muhammad fight was, he doesn't like getting punched in the face. He'll buckle against the pressure. He loves being the hammer, doesn't like being the nail. If someone turns this around, can he deal with it? And in this fight, Gilbert Burns did throw back. He was really good with the knees in points. He landed a couple of good right hands over the top, and Sean Brady barely flinched. He took it all in his stride and he kept moving forward throughout the fight. So on the one hand, you might think, yes, this answered the question to the critics. The Belal Muhammad fight was a learning curve for him, a learning experience. But really, I think there are still question marks over this. So to say it's something we learned is probably a little bit misleading by me. I think what we did learn from this is that Sean Brady can take a punch. He can be in a more of a dogfight like this was in parts. However, Gilbert Burns just didn't throw enough. He was never being the aggressor. He was good, actually, quite good on the back foot. He did some nice knees from the clinch when moving backwards, some really nice scrambles. But do we know that Sean Brady isn't going to buckle if he faces the same kind of offense as Belal Muhammad? I'm one of those now after seeing that fight where I think the fight between Sean Brady and Belal Muhammad would look slightly different, especially with Sean Brady's clear improvements in striking. But I don't think I saw enough from this fight to say that it would be too different. I think that's fair to say. Maybe it will last longer. When you look back at the fight between Belal and Sean Brady, it was more competitive than people have said. A lot of his critics have said since that fight. But really, the jury's still out. We have to see him in another fight against a JDM or Ian Gary, where someone who will... Ian Gary's more of a counter fighter, so maybe not. But someone who really will put it on him. JDM would be a great fight, but I know that he's injured at the moment. To see Sean Brady and JDM fighting, or Sean Brady and an aggressor against him, see if he can really be dragged into those deep waters and go toe-to-toe and not buckle under that pressure. Maybe I'm being harsh saying that that's unanswered. Look, he's an elite MMA fighter. He's clearly got that dog in him. He's clearly durable. He's clearly tough. But we really need to see him in a dogfight where someone's going to come back at him again, because his last two wins against Gilbert Burns and Kelvin Gastelum were two subpar performances by his opponents. So the jury's still out for that, like I say. But these are 5 things we learned from Sean Brady against Gilbert Burns. I like to create dialogue on this channel, so let me know if you agree with it. If there's anything else that you learned in particular from this matchup. We'll be doing another video for the main event next weekend, Sean O'Malley against Merab Dvalishvili. So make sure you subscribe, you tune in for that one, and I'll see you guys later.